Vercel has just introduced cron jobs, which will help you schedule tasks and automate repetitive workflows in seconds. Basically, you can set up a task to hit your API endpoints on a set schedule. Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Hamed. I'm a full stack JavaScript web developer, and here on this channel, we mainly talk about modern web dev topics like React and NextJs. So let's get into this. You can head to the documentation on vercel.com docs cron jobs. I'm going to link it in the description. This was recently introduced in February 2023, and currently this is in still beta version, and it's free on all plans on Vercel. So if you're deploying your sites to Vercel, it's free. You can access it if you're on the free plan. However, you only get to set up 2 tasks or 2 cron jobs that will run once per day. If you're in a higher tier like the Pro or the Enterprise, you have more extended number of tasks you can set up. We'll get to that in a minute down here. But basically all you need to do is written down in this documentation, and we're going to follow this step by step. And once we understood how to do this, we're going to then jump into the code and actually write an example on my own portfolio site to send me an email every day with the subscriber counts on my channel. So if you haven't subscribed and you're learning something from this channel, consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps. But let's get going here. So what are cron jobs? Cron jobs are time-based scheduling tools used to automate repetitive tasks by setting a specific cron expression. We're going to get to this in a second if you're not familiar with what cron expressions are. But basically, you will set up a schedule to run a task on a set interval. Now, how do you create cron jobs? Well, you'll create a function or an endpoint, so you can basically turn any of your endpoints into a cron job. The way that it works is that you would include a vercel.json file inside of your project. This is where we would actually define the cron job. For example, here in this crons tab, if you can see it here on the screen, it's a bit small. Let me just make it bigger. So here we specify a path or the endpoint we want to hit and a schedule. This schedule is the cron expression we're going to get to in a second. But basically, you define this endpoint, and that's your serverless function. So your API endpoints in NextJS will be deployed as a serverless function or an edge function if you define the environment to be the edge. And the cron job or the task just hits that same API endpoint. And we're going to see this in action in my project in a little while. So to set a schedule, we can use cron expressions. Let me just go down here to see the cron expressions before we continue. So if you're familiar with setting up crons, basically you have, or what Vercel supports is 5 different segments that you can define. The first one is going to be the minute, the second is the hour, the third is the day of the month, so 1 through 31, and then the month of the year, and then the day of the week, 0 to 6, 0 representing Sunday, and 6 representing Saturday. What does this mean? So let's see some examples. If you are including asterisks for all 5 slots, this means that this function or this cron job will trigger every minute. If you're using this, it's every 10 minutes. So this is the first slot, which is the minute slot, and we're using this /10 to say every 10 minutes. Now, if you are having 0 and then asterisks on the remaining slots, this is at the beginning of every hour. So this is every hour of every day, every week of the month, or every day of the month. And then the 0 is the beginning of the hour. Similarly, this one would be at 3 a.m. every day. This would be at 5:10 a.m. every Sunday, because 0 at the end represents Sunday. Now, to create these expressions, if you haven't worked with them, there's 2 sites you can go. Cron tab is one that you can use. So you write whatever cron job that you want to write, and it tells you what it means. So like this. So this says it's at every minute. So you can change this and see what it means. Or you can go to this AI version of the cron where you would just write down whatever you need and it will tell you what would the cron expression be. So let's say I wanted to run at 6 a.m. every day. So it gives me this expression that represents what I explained there. So you can use these two to kind of get the expression that you need. And then once you have your expression, you would set it as the schedule. Here is just a string of that expression that you want. And then you would specify the endpoint you want this task to hit. Now this path needs to start with a // and you can also have dynamic routes over here, but you need to kind of specify what segment or what value for that dynamic segment you want it to kind of hit over here. We're going to see an example down below in a second. But once you have included this vercel.json with your cron jobs set, when you deploy to Vercel, it automatically picks up on this file and sets up these cron jobs for you. And then you'd be able to see these from inside your project, which we're going to see once we deploy our own version of tasks. And that's about it. So how do these cron jobs work? As you can see here, Vercel is going to make an HTTP request to the production deployment URL of your project. So wherever you included this vercel.json file, and it ignores the preview deployments. It only runs on production. So for example, here, if you have whatever domain for your project and you have set up a path as we did here for API cron, it's just going to hit this endpoint in your deployment, production deployment. Cron expression we already talked about and how you can use them. There are some limitations with the version of expressions Vercel supports. There is no alternative expressions for the actual day, and then how you would use the day of the month versus the day of the week. So if you're using the day of the month, then you should leave this day of the week as an asterisk, or if you're specifying this, the other one should be an asterisk. You can't specify both at the same time, and the time zone is UTC. Okay. Now, once you set this up and deploy your application, you're going to see this cron job tab inside of your Vercel dashboard of your project, which will help you see what tasks are running. You can see the logs for any errors that happens, or you can disable the cron jobs if you want, or if you no longer want them to run. Now, to manage, to update, to delete, you need to update the vercel.json file and then redeploy your application. Unless you just want to disable them, that you could use this button on the dashboard to just disable your cron jobs. Now, in terms of the limits, because these tasks are literally calling your API endpoints, which are serverless functions. So if you are on paid tiers of Vercel, it will be just counting against your invocations of your serverless functions. If you're on the hobby plan like I am, you get to have 2 cron jobs that are triggered once a day. Now, there's another limit for the free account, and that is the invocations are not guaranteed to be right at the second that you have set them up. So if you have set up something to run at 1 a.m. every day, it will run between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. Not exactly at the time, it may, but I'm guessing they're prioritizing the paid plans over the free ones, which makes sense. Now, there is another limitation to cron jobs in general, not to the hobby plan specifically, and that's how the duration limit for this task. So if a task is running too long, for example, on the hobby tier, you only get 10 seconds of your serverless function running. So if the task that you're scheduling to be run takes longer, it just times out or finishes at 10 seconds. You get more time or duration on the paid plans. But generally speaking, it's better to split up the task so that it runs in under your whatever kind of time limit that you have, so that they are completed. Because if they aren't, and if it fails to run within that time limit, Vercel is not going to rerun them. So it doesn't retry. It just you have to make sure, first of all, to read your error logs to see if there's any errors. And you can see this here on your dashboard. For every task, you have this view logs, so you can see the errors, and you have to make sure that they're actually finishing up before this time limit for your serverless function duration is over, because Vercel is not going to retry calling that task. Now, in terms of how secure they are, we're going to see this in action. You can set up a query string on your endpoint and read that query string from an environment variable that you set up in your project. We can do this in the code example shortly. And then again, as I explained, for dynamic routes, you can have dynamic routes. For example, here we are hitting API Slack team. Maybe we're including the Slack team's ID that we want this task to run for. But as I mentioned, we are specifying that value for that dynamic segment of our API to run. Now, if you set a cron job for an endpoint that doesn't exist, it's going to 404. And what else will new deployment kill currently running cron jobs? That's interesting, because now your cron jobs are set up with your deployments. Now, what if you are having tasks running while a new deployment comes in? It's not going to terminate whatever job it's running. It will let them finish, and then the new deployment or the new cron job will kick in. Concurrency of cron jobs, it's a little more advanced. So if you have two tasks that may overlap, you can set up Redis to set up a lock mechanism so that they're just running one at a time. Or you can set up a timeout so that they time out if they're running longer than they should, so that they don't overlap with the next scheduled task. Currently, as I mentioned, cron jobs are only run on production deployment, so you cannot run cron jobs locally. But we're going to set it up in our code base and then deploy our app and kind of test to see if it runs on the production. So let's just go to the code base. Here, what I'm trying to do for my own website or portfolio site, I want to get an email daily with the subscriber counts of my YouTube channel, for lack of any better use case for the cron jobs to set. You can do different things with the cron jobs. You can run reports, billing reports, or you can check the health of your service system and then send emails. You can write data or to or from external APIs. You can back up. You can use it for different things. Here I'm using it for a daily report of what's going on the channel. Maybe you want to see your view counts, your subscriber counts, your most popular videos. If you haven't checked my site, there is notes and things that I learn, and I sometimes alongside the videos write some notes, and you can see the videos there. And I have a course on NextJs that's coming up hopefully at the end of this month or sometime in April. You can check that out as well. But basically what I'm trying to do here, I've set up an endpoint. If you can see here in the pages API directory, I have set up a cron folder, and inside of it an index.js, which is the index route for that path. And what I'm doing here is that I've defined my handler. This is regular NextJS stuff. I'm calling this get channel statistics function. We're going to look at it in a second. I'm going to get the channel stats, and then from it the subscriber count, and I'm responding with a JSON for now. So this channel statistics is just using the YouTube data API to get the stats for this channel ID, which is my channel ID. So you authenticate with the YouTube API, and then you get you can hit different endpoints, in this case the channels list, and then the stats for that channel. So if I go to the browser now and hit the API/Cron, I should be able to get this JSON returned from this endpoint, which says subscriber count 2100. So thank you very much for anyone that's subscribed to my channel. That really helps supporting what I'm doing here. So basically right now we're just getting this JSON response. Now what I want to do is I want to send an email here. So I'm using Sendgrid for this. It's pretty easy to set up. If you are not familiar with Sendgrid, it easily allows you to use this package from Sendgrid Mail to send emails. I will probably have a video at some point on the channel showing how you can send emails easily with Sendgrid inside NextJs app. But for now, I just assume that you know how to set that up. You just get your API key, you get this from the package, you set the API key so you can interact with your account in Sendgrid. And all you need to do really to send a message with Sendgrid is to create a message. As you can see over here, I'm creating a message to my own personal email from, and you have to set up this from email from inside your Sendgrid account to be able to send. So you have to kind of create and verify a sender account there. Pretty basic, but I have like a subject line, and the HTML for the email is actually this HTML string here. Inside of it, I'm creating the new date and I'm including that subscriber count. And now that we are using this Sendgrid mail client to send this message, maybe we just change this JSON after this is sent to say success true. Okay, so I'll save this, and now if I hit that same API endpoint, I should get an email with this subject and content. So let's just refresh this. Success true, meaning that this task has finished. Let me just go back to my email and open up this recent email that I got. Okay, as you can see, I got the email. It has the subject line with the subscriber count inside of the subject line, and the body of the email with the current date and the subscriber count. Now, the next step for us is to actually turn this into a cron task so that it runs every morning. Let's say at 6 a.m. every morning, I want to hit this API endpoint and then get the subscriber count and send an email to myself. So for that, we're going to go back to this. And as you remember, we have to create this vercel.json file. So let me just open the sidebar here. In here, I'm going to create vercel.json. And inside of it, I'm just going to copy this JSON object. Let me just close this off. If I say this is running at 6, this is going to be at 6 a.m. every day. Okay, this is what I have over here. And now it's going to hit API cron, and I can specify this key shared over here. Currently, I'm not doing this. So if we wanted to do this, going back to kind of securing our cron job or cron task, what we can do here is to actually read this query string and see if this is whatever that we're passing in here. Now you can change this with whatever value that you want. I'm just going to use the same thing to just show how this works. And once we set that in our path, we can just read the content of this query string inside of our endpoint. So right up top in the beginning, before actually calling my static function, get channel static function, I can just check to see if request.query.key is actually containing this value. If not, I'm going to 404 and end and return. Otherwise, I'll continue this way. I just have like a bit of a kind of secure endpoint for my cron task. So as you can see, without that query string set, it failed and actually 404, if you can see down here. And if I now include this key to be equal to shared key, this should go through and give us this success through and send us another email. Now with that, let me just go back to this. So we have set up our API and cron, and this is the path that we are hitting. So instead of our pages, API and cron, this is the path, and the time is actually, the schedule is correct. This is going to be at 6 a.m. every day. But for the purposes of this thing actually happening in deployment, I'll change this to maybe every 5 minutes. because I want to see this in action. Once I deploy this, I want to get that email to make sure this is actually happening. So I'll set it to every 5 minutes. We cannot run more than once a day on the free plan, but hopefully we'll get the first one. So let's see how it goes. And let me just commit this changes and deploy to my production, and then I'll see you on the other side. Okay, so I have committed and pushed the changes to my production deployment, but apparently the Vercel deployment has failed. As you can see here, I have this failed error that says on a hobby account, which is a free account on Vercel, you're only limited to daily cron jobs, as I mentioned. But what we have here is running every minute. So it's just failing to even deploy that or create that cron job. I thought it's going to create that cron job and then send the first one and then fail on the other ones, but it's not going to even set up the cron job for us if it is more than once a day. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this to maybe run on top of the hour at 3 p.m. And right now it's 2:53 p.m. So it should run at 3 p.m. So let's save this and then let's just commit this change again. So let me just add this, close that up. Let's run the git commit, update cron job. And now let's just push and let's see if this actually gets deployed, and I'll see you on the other side. Okay, with that update, I was able to push to Vercel and deploy to production. If I come back here on my dashboard, you can see currently it's that last commit we made. And if you check the cron job tab in your dashboard, I can see now this task scheduled here to run at 3 p.m. every day. It's the /API cron, and it also has our key. Now, if you go to view logs, you should be able to see the logs of this function running. And as you can see for me here, I had an error because I forgot to set the environment variable that I had locally on my project. So another thing you can do here for your cron jobs, you can run them manually, because as I mentioned on the free tier, it's not going to be that accurate on the time that you have set over here. So if it's 3 p.m., it's not going to run 3 p.m. sharp. It has a buffer of 3 to 4 p.m. to actually run that. So you can manually run this task that you've set up, which sends an HTTP request to this API endpoint, and you can kind of debug it. That's what I did to realize that I haven't set the environment variables. So I'm going to go ahead and update my environment variables, and I'll see you on the other side. Okay, so I've updated the environment variables in Vercel and redeployed the site to read the new variables. And if I come to the cron jobs tab and actually view the logs, I can see that the task ran actually at 3:21 successfully with the 200 status code, and I can confirm this in my email that I did receive this email. As you've seen, it was pretty easy to schedule tasks in your project by adding vercel.json file and deploy to Vercel, which basically turns any of your endpoints to a cron job or a task that runs on a schedule. If you have any questions, hit them in the comments for me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.